Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Raw Men. This is episode number 78, and we are talking to a friend of mine, Jason Frye, who is the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the Secular Policy Institute. How do you do, sir?
Thank you for having me on, and I want to welcome you to my guest bedroom library area, which is really reserved for our dog, Ruby, the wonderful Min Pin.
All right, so
So,
take it away. What is the Secular Policy Institute?
the Secular Policy Institute is a think tank and advocacy organization. We've been together since 2014. We have three primary aims. We're a coalition of about 300 member organizations all around the planet: India, South Africa, the United States, Japan, Argentina, Canada, all over the place. We're also a research organization and think tank. We have nearly 30 prestigious fellows in different fields, experts in the field of biology, paleontology, terrorism studies, linguistics, religious studies. We do research. I want to tell you about some of the projects that we're researching this year and the publications we're coming out this year. And we're an advocacy organization. We use our research function and we engage in lobbying, we do advocacy sign-on letters, and we incorporate our coalition into this. And we do really good work. We scaled back a little bit over the last year, and this year we're hitting the ground hard, and we have some wonderful things planned.
Well, to give me an idea, what is it that you actually do or have done? Let's do that first. You said you scaled back over the last year. What did you do the year prior?
So the year prior, we were engaged in a lot of advocacy campaigns. For a few years before that, we were issuing out an advocacy letter once a week. The president of our board, Edwina Rogers, is a lobbyist, and she held a lot of meetings with particular power players. One of the most proud actions that we did concerned a situation that didn't have a lot of action attached to it. There was a situation that happened in Nigeria, and Nigeria is an interesting situation because it's a federal country like the United States. You have sovereignty that's restricted to the states themselves and a federal government that has its own sovereignty. So it's kind of a mixture of laws. And it's a former British colony. And it's the hallmark of a British colony because, as you know, the British policy was divide and conquer. So they set up a state that would have sectarian conflict within it. You had two primary groups of Muslims in the north, two primary groups of Christians in the south, and kind of a religious demilitarized zone built of animists, tribal animists in the middle. On top of that, you have issues in international relations. We call it the resource curse, where if a country has a particular mineral commodity like petroleum, oftentimes corruption will interfere with democratization, and oil is the mineral commodity there. And in the north, you have Sharia that's codified in certain areas. Of course, in the south, the Christian south, you don't have that. And as you've seen over the last few years, you've had Islamists taking a stronghold across different areas of the world, and Nigeria is no exception. In Kano State, which is one of the northern states where they have Sharia codified, it's a Salafist type of Sharia. Salafism is the very violent, orthodox form of Sunni Islam. And there, if you're in a Salafist area, if you say something critical of Muhammad, you're likely to suffer some rather extraordinary consequences. If you say something that steps outside the dominant Salafist line, you also will experience extraordinary consequences. And there you had a small mosque where the imam said that he was a prophet. And during that time, they arrested 9 men from that mosque, including the imam. And they sent.
You think that the imam said that the imam was a prophet?
Yes. And
Okay.
the individuals at the mosque recognized, they say he was a prophet on the level of Muhammad. And the individuals recognized that. So they were tried for blasphemy. And during the trial, they burned the courthouse down. The individuals in the town burnt the courthouse down. And this had no transparency. They weren't releasing the names of those individuals. And it just so happened at the time, the former Christian president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, was pushed out in the election. He was pushed out because of a lot of issues: corruption, the failure to take on Boko Haram. Western education is forbidden. Boko Haram, as you know, was an organization that kidnapped a lot of people. They kidnapped a lot of women and girls, and they they elected a former military dictator who later became an elected legislator, who's now their president, Muhammadu Buhari. And we lobbied President Buhari when he came to DC after he got elected. He came to come on a diplomatic mission to go talk to the Obama administration. And we used our channels, and Edwina met with the president of Nigeria, and he arranged to have those men who were sentenced to death taken out of Kano State and put into government protection in the south of the country. On top of that, we have lobbied the United Nations. We have advocated on gender neutral marriage, also known as marriage equality, to the High Commissioner of Human Rights and the Human Rights Council at the UN. We also have worked in some capacity in asylum for persecuted atheists around the planet. That's one of the projects that we're building right now, actually. We're working on an asylum network for atheists. And one thing that you can do to find out more about this work is once a month we have an international conference call, and we discussed this on the last several conference calls. One of the things we're working on right now is creating channels for people who are being persecuted in places like Bangladesh to have safe harbor in countries that need smart people who are experienced in STEM and tech. Places like Bulgaria and Romania, where they're EU countries, and the youth of those countries, they leave and they go to places like France and Germany. So there's a labor drain. So we're working to build channels like that. We've consulted with groups like Catholic Charities who have helped out in cases, asylum cases for apostates from Pakistan. And those are some of the advocacy projects we've done in the past. And we're starting our advocacy projects again this year. Our two that we're working on this month, we're starting an advocacy project with a sign-on letter to go to India, because India has a particular issue that we're rather concerned with, and that is the criminalization of homosexuality. And this is shocking because India decriminalized homosexuality back in 2009. And we see this particular type of criminalization of in this particular sodomy laws happen in former British colonies. Former British colonies tend to have sodomy laws coming from the British laws. And that's why Nigeria, Kenya, et cetera, have sodomy laws on the books that are still there. Like Kenya, for example, this is one of the advocacy letters that we put out. Not to go too far in a tangent, but with Kenya's sodomy laws, they were trying to push a law that to prove that someone was a homosexual, they would have to be anally examined to see if they've been anally penetrated, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, these laws violate people's dignity. Well, this particular law of the Indian Penal Code, Section 377, criminalizes homosexuality with a jail term attached to it. In 2009, they decriminalized homosexuality. 2013, they reinstated Section 377 on the books. They
So they made being gay illegal again.
Yes, in 2013. And the Supreme Court of India right now is reconsidering Section 377. So that's one of the advocacy campaigns that we have in the works at this moment. In the next week, you'll be seeing a sign-on letter from us. And to carry on with that, to go back to our coalition project, we have about 300 international organizations all around the planet involved in our coalition. And the primary function of the coalition is to proliferate and disseminate information like what was happening in Kenya, what's happening in India. We do the research and we send the information out to our coalition members so they can know what's happening. And then what we ask for in return is we ask for an organizational signature. So that way, when we advocate to these particular countries or advocate to these particular international organizations that we're working with, for example, sometimes we're not saying dictator X and country B, please stop doing this. We're writing to support an international organization's efforts, like Girls Not Brides, for example. That's an organization we've supported in the past, and Catholics for Choice. The one thing to note about Secular Policy Institute is we're not exclusively an atheist organization. Our goal is to advocate for secular governance and to promote the human rights that are listed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations, as well as follow up the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. And so if any of your listeners are part of an organization that's interested in promoting those two things, we would like you to contact us. So that way, later this week, when we come out with our letter to the Supreme Court in India, advocating to decriminalize, to nullify, to judicially review and nullify Section 377, we can have all sorts of organizations, atheist, religious, non-religious, coming together with those two noble aims of those universal human rights that we all agree with, and to keep church and state separate. And it's interesting to note that India decriminalized being transgender a couple years ago, but being gay and lesbian is still against the law. On top of that, the other letter that we're coming out with this week and next week involves the recent Department of Health and Human Services Religious Liberty Order from the Office of Civil Rights called the Protecting Statutory Conscience Rights in Healthcare. This is the thing that came out the other day. This is the thing that President Donald Trump issued on Religious Freedom Day on January 16th, on Thursday, January 16th. And basically, it provides an exemption for healthcare workers to not provide, to refuse care if that care of those particular individuals would violate their particular religious conscience. If they had I think it is a committed religious objection to it. I think that's how they phrased it. And it's really interesting. It's really interesting how they play off religious liberty.
And I've often said that if you cite religion as your reason for any action or motivation, then you haven't given a reason. So if you have a religious objection, you have a baseless objection, in other words.
Yeah.
You brought up so much.
Oh yeah.
I've got a lot of questions and of course want to get some more comments on these. You brought up this one thing where you're meeting with not the Nigerian prince who was recently arrested, different story, but getting these people removed from the country for a death sentence. Did I hear you right?
Yes.
Okay, so you got these people extradited out. You actually met with the dignitaries
Yes.
responsible actually remove these people. And then you jumped right from that. Oh, and then we also do this other thing. And I wasn't able to comment on how impressive that was. Now, with regard to India, I'm a little confused as to what's going on in India. I was invited to go to another World Atheist Conference that's in southern India that was just done last week. Unfortunately, I was in Europe at the time.
Yes.
I couldn't go to that, but I'm surprised that they have. Are you familiar with the atheist community?
Yes. Well, do you know what the full name of the country of India is?
No.
It's the Secular Republic of India. That's the name of the country. And there are atheist organizations in India. There are secular organizations in India. And while values that people, and keep in mind, secular is a big, beautiful, broad term. It means many, many things. Sometimes those things have a lot of baggage attached in particular circles, like in the Muslim world, secular means Western imperialism for the most part. Other places, secular takes on a very deep cultural tradition, like in France, laïcité. It's considered the fourth pillar of French life. It's the third pillar of French life. You have liberty. Liberty. The fourth pillar: liberty, equality, fraternity, and secularity. Laïcité. And
I'm confused at that too, because doesn't their constitution begin with religious platitudes?
yeah, so it's secularism is very broad, and there's a valuative secularism in certain Western countries like the United States, where it's sort of an identity issue, where if you say that you're a secular American, that includes a whole host of values and political and social expectations attached to it. And so you can have procedural secularism, you can have valuative secularism. Let's see, there's a really interesting book, and I probably have it right over here. Oh, I misplaced it. Oh, good, it's right here. I'm actually reading a really interesting book. I like reading really interesting books. This is a really interesting book commenting on it. It's called The Power of Religion in the Public Sphere. It's 4 essays by Judith Butler, Jürgen Habermas, Charles Taylor, and Cornel West, talking about secularism and religious values and all that. So yeah, I can understand where, if it's called the Secular Republic of India, if we're in a particular context and framework where secular means one particular thing, that may seem completely, opposed to something like France, where there are religious platitudes there. In France, they have a form of assertive secularism where the government will sponsor religious organizations as long as you keep your religious values outside of French society. So it's a division it's a division with government sponsorship. In the United States, secularism takes on two particular forms. We want a complete separation, and we want a different type of separation. But in India, secularism, it is rather interesting because you have certain laws that keep religion and government separate. At the same time, you have certain religious quotas, and you're dealing with sectarian conflict on a grander scale than a lot of other countries that would claim to be secular. For example, in India right now, which is supposedly secular in name, you have Hindu nationalists that have taken over the government. For example, Narendra Modi wasn't issued a visa to the United States until he became the Prime Minister of India, because he, as a Hindu nationalist, was in charge. He influenced riots that killed a lot of Muslims. And then when he became when he started leading India, what happened? You saw a rise in Hindu nationalism. They banned beef. You saw basically a cultural license to go after people who ate beef, a cultural license to go after Muslims. And of course, you have, the religious sectarian conflicts that came when the partition happened after the mandate. And,
Yeah, I
and
remember that.
so,
I remember this myself. I was talking about the atheist community because I was at the ninth atheist
mhm,
World Atheist Conference in India, and during the week or so that I was there, I remember there was a mob of people. It was in the news who it was a mob of Hindus crashed into somebody's house and
yep,
killed him for eating beef. That was his crime. Was it? And it wasn't. I don't even think it was necessarily a crime, but a mob broke into his house, drugged this guy outside. It was a Muslim man, and drug him outside and killed him for eating beef. And then it turned out that it wasn't actually beef. They didn't check to see that he, I guess they just based on that he was Muslim. So why would he bother eating chicken instead of beef? But yeah, this happened during the week that I was there.
yeah. And in those situations, you also have issues of tribalism where, like Northern Ireland, not to throw in like international. It's a situation where your community, you're a Muslim because you're part of the Muslim community. Your particular tribal group is indicated by a particular religion. Like in Christopher Hitchens' book, God is not great, how religion poisons everything. He brings up that joke from Northern Ireland where an atheist is stopped at a checkpoint and he's asked, "Are you a Protestant or a Catholic?" And he replies, "I'm an atheist." And the person questions, "Well, are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist?" And we're also dealing with issues of corruption and poverty
Yeah, I would
where
have
there's
laughed
not a
at
lot
that.
of political.
I would have laughed at that joke had I not already been to Northern Ireland. I've heard it a bunch.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's that we have a high degree of saturation with that particular joke, and it's it's a matter. A lot of this has to deal with poverty, where you don't have a lot of political agency.
Yeah, I have to comment on the issue, the what am I thinking?
Mhm.
The I can't think of the word now, but the issue with having a secular government but not a secular populace, or vice versa. I mean, so in India you have atheist groups, but you have the Hindu majority that is in control of everything, and so everybody must be subservient to them. They have, the secularism is in the name of the country, but they're also one of the most religious countries in the world. And there's a lot of Hindus who identify as Hindu, but they're kind of culturally Hindu, so that being Hindu is no more religious
Yeah,
than being Jewish in the United States.
yeah,
Just
a lot of
because you're
atheists in
Jewish
India.
doesn't mean you believe in God, right? Well, there's a lot of Hindus that don't believe in God,
Yeah,
but they're still giving favor to that. They're still giving homage or payment to that and supporting, that organization. They still go to the temples. They still engage in the rituals and so forth, and they permit these other laws and other traditions that are
yeah,
associated with that. In
and
Ireland, you have a strictly Catholic government. The religion absolutely rules the country, but what, 1 out of 20 people in Ireland, at least in Dublin, but from a recent poll, believe in God. 1 out of 20, like everybody, that the country is atheist. The entire country is run by the Catholic Church, but everybody
yeah,
is atheist. And then in the United States, we are supposedly a secular country. We were the first secular government ever, but we have the most religious populace in the entire Western world. And then
yeah,
what you were
and
talking about, this other division between the Catholics in the South and the Muslims in the North, and all of this seems like being the only sober person in a bar trying to get two drunk people from fighting.
yeah, and there's so much misunderstanding with this, and you know, with me, a lot of the times, I read all the time another book right here. Is it Sacred and Secular by Ron Engelhardt and Pippa Norris from Harvard? This talks a lot about it. It's not a matter of intelligence or relation to science. A lot of these issues rely on existential crisis shocks. Um, problems problems with existential security, where people, it's all tribalism. There's so much more to this than is usually discussed, and it's discussed poorly because I think one of the problems is that when you're in a country like the United States, religion to you is professional. You profess it. It's an issue where religion is focused on an issue of what you believe more than, and this is how we're supposed to discuss it, what you believe, instead of I'm religious because my family's religious. And like you're bringing up too, we look at Norway. Norway is a really good example because Ireland, you also have, one's part of the United Kingdom, the other is Northern, et cetera, et cetera. But Norway, which is a unified country with a homogenous population, with a dominant, religious group that has a state church, that the king is, it's a republic, but the king is the head of the church, and it's a mostly ethnically homogenous country. Most people in Norway are atheists.
As is the United Kingdom, wherein
Yeah.
again the queen is the head of the church and
Yeah,
the head of the state,
and
and
the church is like it. The church is like it.
the
Yeah,
population is 50% atheist.
yeah, and the church is like your gym membership. It's compulsory, but you never show up. You pay it. It's compulsory, but you never show up. And so the other thing that representing an organization that's the Secular Policy Institute, that's not specifically an atheist organization, there's also a lot of deeply religious people that, talking about secularism itself, they want to have a separation of church and state for various reasons. The average religious person who's secular, religion is a deeply personal thing for them, but they want to make sure religion and government is separate. For example, what was it where you had the how many hundreds or thousands of religious organizations writing to the Trump administration saying, no, we want to, oh yeah, with the Johnson Amendment, we want to keep the Johnson Amendment. And they're the leaders of religious congregations. And, to tie it back together, and I like our conversation because it's, kind of going all over this place, but we have so many good things to talk about, is that to tie it further back, to go back, we were talking about Jefferson and Religious Liberty Day a little while ago. Jefferson set a wall of separation between church and state, and he wasn't the one who came up with that phrase. The one who came up with that phrase was the founder of the Baptists, Roger Williams. And Roger Williams said, we need a wall of separation to protect the garden of faith from the wilderness of the world, which, going from a historian's perspective, you would say that was quite a division from his Congregationalist roots coming from Massachusetts, because the Puritans, the Congregationalists, said that it's our covenant with God, the new covenant that we have, to go out into the wilderness of the world to reform it. Well, Roger Williams said, no, we need to keep religion separated from government. And that's why Jefferson said it in his 1803 letter to the Danbury Baptist. He was using their language. Jefferson had this opinion in his writings and his own philosophy, that he wanted secularism for something completely different than what the Baptist wanted it for. He didn't want religion to intrude on everyone else. And I want to bring up one particular thing.
Before you go on, I wanted to comment on that. I mean, I was raised Mormon, and Mormon are aware of something that's surprising that a lot of other people in America are not aware of. There was a law passed, and I can't remember what they called it, but the nickname was the Mormon Execution Order. It was issued by the governor of Illinois or Missouri. I don't remember which now. But it was in 1831 or thereabouts, and it was not repealed until 1976. And what it was it authorized state militia to murder Mormon families, men, women, and children, and take over their property simply for being Mormon. And this is why the Mormons had to flee out of Illinois and Missouri and into Utah. That's the reason Mormons went to Utah, was because of this extermination order. And what happens is when the state, when even
Hmm.
seems to have adopted a particular religion or religious denomination, then every other denomination becomes subservient to that.
Exactly.
Just by the
Exactly.
implication. That's why the founding fathers wrote, that you will not. Um, how did they phrase it? I can't believe I can't remember this line out of the First Amendment. The Establishment Clause. Isn't that amazing? I can't remember that at this point.
Congress shall make no law
Even
respecting an
respecting.
establishment of religion
At
or
the words.
prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't put the word even in brackets, but but that was the implication, was that they didn't want a law, uh, not just establishing, but even respecting an establishment of religion, meaning
And
they
that
didn't
was even a
want
watered
the
down version
creation of it.
because the original version of it was more assertively secular. They had to water it down to get the evangelicals on board to pass the damn thing. And I love the First Amendment. I don't mean to refer to it as the damn thing, but I guess to quote one of the presidents, the Constitution is not best served by blind veneration. That's what Wilson said in his book, Constitutional Government. But there's one thing I want to bring up with the founding fathers, and this goes back to the other day with Religious Freedom Day. So Thomas Jefferson, on his epitaph, his gravestone, what's carved in for all eternity, his 3 accomplishments he wanted to be recognized for. Do you know what those were? Take
I
a
haven't seen
guess.
that. Don't know.
Okay. So what do you think they would be, though, if he would say his 3 greatest accomplishments?
Well, the Declaration of Independence, the being president,
Nope.
and
Nope.
nope. Okay.
So, and I'm sure that we have people watching this who are just like, I know what it is. I know what it is. And his epitaph has that the author of the Declaration of Independence, and I'm probably saying these out of order. You'll get a comment on YouTube or something saying it, but that's okay. I like that. I like being fact checked. The father of the University of Virginia and the author of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom. And in his proclamation the other day, Donald Trump cited Thomas Jefferson on his religious freedom proclamation that prefaced this particular order that would excuse healthcare workers who have to be licensed and bonded by the state, not just somebody who just is operating of their own guise, but somebody who's licensed and bonded by the state, because we have particular rules and regulations that are supposed to keep you safe, because lots of people screwed up. And this is part of the function of government. And I know that you're going to get a lot of criticism from anarchists out there who say regulations are bad. Well, regulations happen because people get hurt. And some regulations are bad. A lot of regulations are good. And this is a discussion for another day. Well, in it, he quoted Thomas Jefferson in the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom. Jefferson wrote the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom in 1777. I think he was governor of Virginia at the time, and I think he went back and became governor of Virginia later. And he tried to put it through the legislature of the state of Virginia, but it didn't pass. And then a few years later, in I believe 1784, the governor of Virginia was "Give me liberty or give me death," the Christian extremist Patrick Henry. And Patrick Henry tried to push through a law that would pay teachers of the Christian religion with public money. So James Madison came out with this stirring document that I recommend everybody read, because it is a foundational document on secularism. Madison was a genius in political theory, and he came out with the Remonstrance against a bill of religious assessment. And this created a window for which the legislature of the state of Virginia would pick up Jefferson's religious freedom statute, pass it, and it would separate church and state in Virginia. And Jefferson, of course, was of the mindset that the government could not compel a person to act against their conscience. And Trump cited Jefferson on that. And I have the quote right here, where he said that Jefferson said, "All men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities." Trump, of his own statement, which I probably say own statement is in, one of his staff wrote this.
Because he obviously didn't read the original works that he's referring to.
Well, he may have, but this doesn't talk about how terrific.
What is the likelihood that Trump ever actually read anything by Thomas Jefferson?
I think we could do a would you like it as a Bayesian statistics or yes, of course. But he wrote, it's kind of like back when George W. Bush was president. One of the Onion articles said George W. Bush dazzles White House diners with impromptu dissertation on the works of Virgil. But Trump said this because, of course, it's attributed to Trump, so therefore we'll just say it. But he said, "Unfortunately, not all have recognized the importance of religious freedom, whether by threatening tax consequences for particular forms of religious speech or forcing people to comply with laws that violate their core religious beliefs without sufficient justification." And so one thing that I have to say about this is, there is a really important discussion to be had on being compelled to do something that violates your conscience. There is an important discussion to be had. And it's a complicated discussion. It's very nuanced. And it's an important discussion. And it's an important discussion because as individuals, we have individual reasons for doing particular things. And coercion is something that it's unconscionable for the most part, but at the same time we have particular obligations in particular circumstances. And what the person who wrote this, will say Donald John Trump because his name is on it.
Well, his name is on a lot of things he didn't actually build.
Whoever wrote this. Well, I'm just giving the stable genius the benefit of the doubt. One quick aside on this, a friend of mine and I went to this historical ranch in Southern California, the Leo Carrillo ranch, in former silent Mexican film star out in Carlsbad, California. The docent there said, "And then we'll take the tour and we'll go to the stable." And my friend said, "Well, when are we going to go to the unstable?" But anyway, so they cherry pick. They use a particular portion of this. And if they would have read a little further, here's what Jefferson wrote: that it is time enough for the rightful purposes of civil government for its officers to interfere when principles break out into overt acts against peace and good order. And those acts against peace and good order are the government giving license to individuals to violate, to pick and choose whatever laws they want to follow based upon some kind of arbitrary claim saying it violates their religious commitment, to go against other oaths that they took, like the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. You're serving a particular licensed and bonded role to serve a particular group of people. When did negligence become subservient to, I feel icky about this?
Yeah, well, also one of the first complaints that I had about the non-secular nature of our legal system is that that we have religious what is the where you have I can't believe I can't think of the word. Isn't that ridiculous? I'm having an old man moment here, where.
Well, the government forgot about it, so you're
no. Where? Well, that was beautiful.
Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. That's the one. Even though we're divided by politics right now, that's the one thing that's uniting all of us: being crippled by viruses at the moment.
Yeah, so I can't believe that I can't think of the word, but it's where you have the laws allow that if you are of this religion, then you can smoke ganja, for example, or you can smoke
It's an
peyote if
exemption.
you're of this other religion.
You have an
What's that?
exemption. You have an
Yes.
exemption.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking privilege is actually the word I was thinking of, the word that I was trying to think of, and that's strange that I couldn't think of it.
And
But
Aaron, you know, one thing.
an example that comes
Uh-huh.
to mind is this woman that was given a job working for a government office, and she knew that there are requirements that you cannot bring a weapon into the building. Well, she gets this job. She works at this job for a couple of weeks, and then she files a suit because she's Sikh, and she wants to be able to bring her knife. I can't remember the name of the knife either, but
It's one of the 4Ks of Sikhism. It's the kirpan.
so she knew when she got the job that she can't have a weapon, but now she's going to claim religious privilege because she's of this religion that allows her to ignore this law, so she gets special privilege, so she's the only one that gets to carry the knife because she uses the same excuse that the Scientologists use for being the only one who can be responsible for helping other people as the people of this religion or of this religion, depending on which religion you're talking to. So that was the
So,
thing that always bothered me, was a special privilege claimed for religion. If you have a religious exemption, if you have reasons for your conscience, and I understand that there's valid reasons why you shouldn't be compelled to do something against your conscience, but you have reasons for that, and you can present arguments to explain your reasons for that. But as I said before, if religion is the reason, then that isn't a reason. I can't respect religion as a reason. For you're welcome to believe whatever you believe for whatever reason you believe it, but
well,
you shouldn't get special privilege or exceptions because of that.
yeah. So, in in the laws as they presented themselves, and I'm not a lawyer. I just have a master's in political science and public policy, so I'm not a lawyer. So, just putting that out there right now. But as a policy specialist, you learn how to analyze all this stuff. But in the laws relating to this, there's something called the belief action test, and it goes along exactly what you're saying. And this pendulum has created this interesting pathway through these particular issues. And I'm going to dredge up the name of somebody who may make you cringe when I say his name. He's the late jurist from the Supreme Court, the late Associate Justice Antonin Scalia. And there's a verdict that Scalia wrote, and it's I agree with his ruling in employment division versus Smith, and I think that's the one. Like I said, I'm just getting over a cold, so my head's a little foggy. But it was this particular case in which you had a no tolerance policy for drugs in the state of Oregon. And you have these two counselors, these two drug counselors at this drug treatment facility in the state of Oregon. And they were members of the Native American Church. And one of the sacraments of the Native American Church happens to be imbibing hallucinatory peyote. And they were tested positive for having used peyote. And what Antonin Scalia wrote in this particular case was that if the laws are general and are neutral and generally applicable, that your religious conscience falls to the wayside of that. If the laws aren't directly targeting your religion, if they're general and neutrally applicable, then you have to follow them. You don't get that way carved out. And shortly after that, Congress came and they put out a particular law called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Bill Clinton led the way with that. And that particular law from 1993 following Employment Division versus Smith, 1993, said that if a government act substantially burdens your religious exercise, that you can have a claim against it. And that opened the door to all the crap that we have right now. And there's a particular bill that Representative Kennedy out of Massachusetts keeps reintroducing. I think it's on its second introduction, and it's the Do No Harm Act, which is trying to amend the 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is basically between the government and individuals. That's what it was, is between the federal government and individuals. And Kennedy introduced a bill to clarify language that would uphold civil rights legislation and civil rights protections that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 had chipped away at. And then what we saw after a host of Religious Freedom Restoration Acts came through at the states, which were just about the government and individuals, we saw a second wave emerge. And this is the one they're going at right now, which is individuals and individuals. Individuals who aren't government actors. Private individuals having the license to discriminate against other people based upon this second wave of Religious Freedom Restoration Acts. And to open up license to pick and choose what laws you're going to follow. That creates an unfair democracy. And democracy has two structures. It has a procedural side, and that procedural side is voting. And it has a substantive value side. And the core of that substantive value side is fairness. It's a rule of law that applies to everyone, a nation of laws, and fairness within that democratic structure. And this particular wave of religious freedom, liberty, conscience protecting Restoration Act laws at the states that we see again and again and again with the same thing, religious freedom laws, religious liberty laws, we see them all the time. What it is shrouded with individual or religious organization. You can pick and choose what you want to do in spite of established laws that would affect other people, and you get to keep your tax exempt status. And we make it really difficult for people to go after you based upon violating, for example, the government to go after you for violating civil rights laws. And we make it almost impossible for your tax exemption to be burdened by that. And that is just chilling. It's absolutely chilling that we privilege what is supposed to be kept apart. We give it an more active place in society to run roughshod over the most vulnerable people. Over the most vulnerable people. You know? And here's the one thing that I think doesn't get brought up enough. And this should absolutely be brought up, because this is not a slippery slope. This exists out there. And it's not a matter of proving if someone, and this is not commenting on the law itself, this is a direct message to people who may support these laws. And it's not a matter of a person has to be gay or lesbian or transgender or whatnot. It's a matter of perception. And it gives a license to these groups to violate civil rights laws, to infringe upon the inherent fairness that we set our democratic structure upon, to say, if I think that you're like this, then I get to discriminate against you. And guess what? When you support these laws and someone thinks that you're gay or lesbian and you're not gay or lesbian, and they refuse to serve you, nothing you can do about it. You think you're safe because you're not gay or lesbian. And guess what? You can be a victim of these laws that you support.
There was a recent attempts to pass the bathroom bill.
Yep.
And one of the things that I brought up about that I didn't see anyone else mention is that your somewhat masculine-looking great aunt might be inspected upon entering the restroom, right?
Yep.
If somebody thinks that that's a man in a dress. So how is your great aunt going to respond to that? And I mean, and this is just the law, right? They're just making sure that you're actually that gender, or you're, you know, slightly effeminate cousin, the same thing, the teenage emo, whatever.
Excuse me.
Same thing.
Hmm.
Doesn't as you say, it doesn't. Not. Maybe this person's not gay. Maybe they're, but they're just being judged on how they express their masculinity or femininity or whatever at whatever age, right? Which means that exactly what you're talking about. It's just wanton opinions that people have, prejudices that people have, which then they get to use to violate other people's dignity. Like when you were talking about, inspecting rectums to see if people are gay. To say nothing
Yeah.
of the fact that if you had anal sex, that doesn't mean that you did so willingly. That that maybe this test to see whether you're gay might just indicate whether you're a choir boy.
Or you ate a big meal recently.
I wasn't even going to go into the rest of that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like that one passage in the Bible. I think it's in Numbers 31, where they say to kill all the little girls who have known a man by lying with him, and so you have to inspect them. Well, exactly what does that inspection detail of all of these preteen girls? How do you verify their virginity? I didn't.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the Bible didn't go into all of that, but it's the same story that you're talking about right now. With regard to India, we started
Hmm.
talking about this atheist community that has that I visited a couple years back, where they
Hmm.
do the World Atheist Conference, and they have this large. They have their own hospital. They have a museum. They have a block of flats. It's actual community. It's a block of buildings put together. I wish I could remember the name of the thing. But who is your contact in India, or what sort of contacts do you have? I don't want names necessarily, but what sort of contacts do you have for influencing the Indian government with regard to these laws?
Well, one thing is that our board president, Edwina Rogers, who was our lobbyist and chief representative, she did a lot of work outside of India. So she has a lot of contacts there. And personally, my husband is Indian. He's
Okay.
from Pune. So we have connections there. On top of that, one of our fellows, Taslima Nazreen, she is in India as well. She's a Bangladeshi author who has been persecuted, and we have connections to India. We have connections in Bangladesh. We have connections in Pakistan. Individuals out there who are part of our coalition, and so with that, on top of that, we have lobbied certain groups at the United Nations in the past, and one thing that we're pursuing this year, because if you're a nonprofit, a registered nonprofit, after 2 years you can apply to become a UN member organization, an NGO. We're doing that this year, so we can be at more meetings. So we have connections in India. We can write letters to governing offices. Like I said, I have personal connections with the country, and
Do you actually have lobbyists in effect with these different countries?
um, just Edwina right now, and she travels all the time. And for example, recently she was in, I believe, Bulgaria, and to deviate away from India, she met with the Bulgarian ambassador to the United States and the Romanian ambassador to the United States, and we've been a bit uh, more low key and small scale in the past couple of years, but this is the year we're expanding. One thing we're building, which ties into India, is this year we're building a series of 6 working groups, a couple thematic and 4 regional working groups. and regional working groups is the South Asian Working Group. And
You said building these groups?
yes,
Okay.
we
You said you're building working groups, and what other kind of group?
Just the working groups right now.
Okay.
The two types of working groups we're building are regional and thematic. And one of these
did you say fanatic?
Oh, thematic.
Theme.
Fanatic. Well, you know, with a lot of volunteer organizations, you know, when you have volunteers in a particular group, sometimes they just do a little bit of work. So we want that fanatic edge. No, I'm kidding. No, thematic. Sorry, like I said, I have this cold happening. And we have a South Asian working group that we're building right now. We have several individuals, a couple from India, some from Bangladesh, and this is so we can do our advocacy work, you know, with more precision. And
so what I was getting there is the mechanics of how the organization operates.
Yes.
So you have effectively one lobbyist and a number of other advocates who write letters. And is there any other means of communication at work here?
At the moment, this is what we have. And it's been somewhat effective so far, but that's because we've had a smaller staff, have volunteers, and we've been building what we've been doing. We've been building our resources, you know, and creating a more precise direction of where we're going. And like I said, that's why we're building these working groups, so we can have linguistic and cultural expertise on our side. So that way, you know, the amount of issues of crisis that are happening, it's not stopping. And we want to have a stronger outreach and put out more work and have that aspect for linguistic and cultural expertise. And then, like I brought up the Religious Freedom Restoration Act a moment ago, in the past, we've done some publications like our World Future Guide, where we have our fellows write essays. This year, we are doing several publications that we're in the process of researching and working on. One is a policy paper on Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, detailing the two waves of this particular legislation in the United States. There have been a few instances, like in France, where these types of laws are influencing the types of laws that are being written there. We're doing an index on secular government and secular society, like we were talking a moment ago, how you have the social commitments and you have policies. And what you're going to see from Secular Policy Institute coming out next year, probably 6 months from now, we're going to be posting on our website something similar to Freedom House, where they have their index of civil and political rights per country. We're going to be doing that with secular society and secular governance. We're going to be looking at issues such as public financing of religion, the influence that religious groups have in the public sphere, the rights of religious exercise, issues of religious privilege. You know, like in Russia, for example, they passed the Uranova laws, I think they're called, a couple years ago, that were called the Russian anti-terror laws, that gave a special privilege to the Russian Orthodox Church, and it clamped down on Jehovah's Witnesses, and it basically prohibited, with penalty of fine and I think imprisonment, possibly imprisonment, I haven't read it in a couple of years, but it clamped down on proselytization and having religious meetings that are not sanctioned by the state. And these situations are happening all the time. And that's our role, as I see it, as CEO of Secular Policy Institute and as a political scientist who studies religion and politics, to have this think tank that has these particular issues and events that happen, to consolidate them as an information clearinghouse. In the past, we've had our fellows meet with members of Congress, and to basically be there to influence legislation, to be there to inform what's happening around the world, to put out and publish policy reports on things like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. There's another paper that we're working on right now about religious education, because you have groups like the YAFID, like Young Advocates for Fairness in Education. I think that's what it's called. They advocate for students in yeshivas. And students in yeshivas, they have neglect. They have a lot of neglect because they stopped learning about math and science around the age of 11. Not all yeshivas, but quite a few of them. They'll go and they'll just start studying Jewish scripture from 8 in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. They don't learn about the Big Bang or dinosaurs. And it's a matter of, you can have a life in those insular Orthodox Jewish communities because they'll provide jobs for you. But what if you don't want to live in those communities? The education you receive as a kid, you don't exactly have the same starting place that other people would have to enter into the community as an effective citizen, as someone with enough skills to get a decent job. Same with a lot of Christian schools in this country, where you, like, for example, there was a report recently on Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education. One person that was on Huffington Post, one person who contributed to that particular expose, she attended a meeting that I held in San Diego. I'm living in Los Angeles right now, but I'm wrapping up my role that I've held for the last 14 years as the president of the Humanist Association of San Diego, a local secular humanist group. She came to our meeting one night about a month or so ago, late December, and she brought up her experience in a Baptist school, and hers is one of many, many, many stories of severe neglect of people in religious schools who bypass, state required curriculum. A couple years ago, the state of California also came out with, a ruling saying that people who attend certain religious schools don't get an automatic pass to the University of California because their curriculum did not meet the standards that other students in the public schools have to meet. And if you have the right to send your kid to a religious school, if you want to impart certain values from your religion, you have a right to do that. But at the same time, you don't have a right to shield your child from that basic standard of care and basic constellation of information that every other kid is getting. Because
But
what
that
you're
seems to
doing,
be the motivation of so many so many like homeschool people, and I mean, especially here in Texas. I mean, I'm hearing stories
yeah,
all the time about how that's exactly what they want to do, is shield those children, like the Jewish community that you're talking about, where they never get that outside information.
yeah, and guess what? The state steps in when parents neglect their kids. And yes, the primary responsibility of educating a child is and values, and that is on the parents. But we have the state to come in to supplement what the parents don't do, so the kid has a fair shake in life, because
So,
the kid is a member of our society. Our
so
society has an obligation to kids.
do you have a website that lists like the concerns that the Secular Policy Institute is acting on, or where people can add to that list of concerns?
Yes, we're in the process of updating it right now with a lot of new stuff, but you'll see policy recommendations on it. You'll see ways to get involved with us. It's secularpolicyinstitute.net. It's a
And
long
the
one.
link will be included below.
Yes. And, there's no shortage of things for us to talk about. There's so much that needs to be done. and we're a good outlet to volunteer with, and we need a lot of help right now because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. There's a lot of laws that need to be tracked. There's a lot of news items that need to be, brought to our attention. We're expanding our coalition this year so we can get even more signatures on these particular letters that we're issuing, and at the same time, the more coalition members we have, the more information gets cycled back to us.
So if people want to become active in your group, become members of the Secular Policy Institute, how do they go about doing that?
You can subscribe to our newsletter, which we send out every single week. We put out volunteer opportunities, and initially we had just done our sign-on letters with organizational signatures. And this year, we're probably going to expand beyond that, so we do both an organizational and an individual signature.
All right. So I'm going to include a web link below so that people who are interested in getting involved, or hopefully that the website directs people to how to volunteer,
it does, yeah.
What's available, what you can do, where to post your concerns, how to act on them, and that sort of thing. All of that is there. Very good. Very good.
And then one last thing, and our coalition members also have, our fellows have what they work on promoted through our organization, and our coalition members do as well. One of our coalition members is the Free Thought Society in Philadelphia, and they've been heavily active for the last 25 years. I just want to give a quick plug for my dear friend Margaret Downey and this great coalition member, the Free Thought Society in Pennsylvania. They're having their 25th anniversary party in Philadelphia coming up in February, and I just wanted to send that message out from Margaret, because a lot of us know Margaret, and she's been such one of the backbones of the secular movement, both domestically and internationally. And she's such a spectacular individual. Yeah. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Margaret. So that's another thing. If you have an organization, we will promote what you're doing. And then another thing that we're going to be starting this year is later this year, we're going to have some actual panel discussions that we're going to schedule in particular locations. One of the panel discussions that we're going to be working on is religious clothing and laws relating to religious clothing in democratic pluralistic societies. Because we have go ahead.
Okay.
I'm here.
Yeah, I have to say, every topic you've brought up has prompted where I want to comment about it, and I've been biting my tongue all the way through.
Oh yeah, there's so much to talk about.
And I'll just let you continue, but we do need to close up.
Okay. So I guess lastly about that, we're going to have panel discussions on it, because these are important things that we're going to talk about. Like I said, we're not an atheist exclusive organization, because a secular government benefits everybody. A secular leaning pluralistic society represents and it benefits everyone, because it leaves a place where you can have diversity and the benefits. It's a cosmopolitan issue. One other book I'll recommend, I'm reading it right now, is Irshad Manji's The Trouble with Islam Today. She represents the spirit, the deep, somewhat hidden spirit of free thought in Islam called ijtihad. And she says in this book that you go into a Christian aisle in a bookstore and you see lots of Christian commentaries and books saying what's wrong with Christianity from Christians, but you don't see that from Muslims. And so part of the issue of Secular Policy Institute not being specifically an atheist organization is we need these religious voices. We need these secular religious voices, because if we just come out with this atheist discourse, then no one's going to listen to us. And the atheist discourse and secularism is just one corner of it. It's a valuable corner, but from that humanist ethics side, we're all in this together, and we have to listen to everyone, and we're never going to agree on everything. But if we can gain a little bit of ground forward that benefits everybody, where everyone can have a little bit more room, have a little bit more agency, have more room and more of an impetus to contribute, we all win. And this is what we do, and this is the purpose of the organization.
All right. Is that going to be your final statement? You want to close?
I think so. I'm glad you had me on today, and I'm glad we could have this chat. And I think everything that you do is fantastic. And I thought, I'm sad that the run for office didn't make it all the way to the polls, but you know, I feel so privileged that I get to chat with you because of the positive influence you've had on the secular community and how much good work you've done. And I'm so glad that we could chat today.
I didn't expect it to go there because I was actually going to say the same about you. I mean, president of I mean, I forgot the list of accolades I was just looking at earlier for all the organizations that you've headed,
Yeah.
for humanist organizations and everything down through. I think it was like that more than a decade easily.
Yeah.
So
2003 is when I started, and when you see these things, I guess the last thing about Secular Policy Institute and what we do, every month we're getting at least 3 to 5 emails from individuals where they're persecuted, that their government is either complicit in the persecution by direct persecution or unable or unwilling to protect them from organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami, against right-wing Christian nationalist groups, against Al-Qaeda, situations like that. And you see individuals in the United States who are Jehovah's Witness, who were as children neglected by not receiving medical care. And you see issues where people don't have agency in society because they're religious minorities. And these particular issues all tie back to a government privilege of particular forms of religion. When you have a firsthand contact with this, it's hard not to get involved. And I think once you have a firsthand contact, it's your responsibility ethically and morally to get involved, to help people who don't have a voice, help marginalized people. And that's what SPI is here for, to do the research, to unite the groups that can have efficacy and influence, and everyone else together who's concerned about this, and try to do something because we give a damn. And that's what it's about. And it's not a matter of accolades. It's not a matter of what groups I've headed or been a part of. It's that as a human being involved in something bigger that benefits people that you're never going to meet, that you may never hear about, that makes their life a little bit better, and for people long after you've been here. That's why we do it. So
let's try to do something
that's over here.
Give a damn. That's
exactly.
Exactly. All right, on that, we'll close it up. Thank you very much,
right.
Jason.
Thank you so much. Thank you.